Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us and happy National Indigenous Peoples Day to you. This is BC Today broadcasting from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Up first, the role of Indigenous knowledge in managing forests and wildfires. And we're asking you, how and what are you celebrating this National Indigenous Peoples Day? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. I'm Michelle Eliot on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on cbc.ca/BC, CBC Gem, and on YouTube. This is BC Today. Today is the summer solstice, and it's what most of us in BC describe as the first day of summer. Environment Canada has released its predictions for the season ahead. They are forecasting abnormally hot weather, and the agency is warning that will intensify what's already become one of the worst wildfire seasons on record in BC. Meteorologist Armel Castellan says that increasingly there is a cascading effect where one extreme weather event has an impact on the next extreme event. And he says we have seen examples of this in BC.
June of 2021, the heat, the fires that were started very early that season, followed by a very strong atmospheric river in November after a very wet fall up until that point, showed at which point the landscape and the environment is susceptible to the impacts of the first type of signal or event, the dry, the hot, the smoky, and followed by a very wet event. And similarly, what we're seeing in parts of Alberta with upwards of 160, 180 millimeters over the past 48 hours are a lot of rain over an area that has been very dry, very droughty, and some of it with burn scars. And so those things are what we call cascading impacts and can not be ignored because they're quite literally tied together.
That was meteorologist Armel Castellan from Environment Canada. 12:08 now, 1:08 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, advocates for Indigenous communities say emergency planning challenges for them are compounded. And they say there is more that the province can do to support them and to draw on Indigenous knowledge in the fight to protect communities. Now, to find out more about that and the season ahead, I'm joined by Justin Perry from Squamish. Justin is a member of the Métis Nation, BC, and an instructor of forest and natural areas management at BCIT. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. Happy National Indigenous Peoples Day to you.
Thank you, you as well.
And when you hear about those concerns, those projections from Environment Canada, how concerned are you?
Myself, I am concerned to some degree, but at the same time, I don't feel hopeless. I feel like us as a species are resilient, and I know that we are taking steps in the right direction. But at the same time, I think we need to accelerate what we are doing, look at what systems are in place and where can we improve, and call upon other people and other forms of wisdom and technology to help us in this era of climate change and these effects cascading upon each other. So I'm worried, but not hopeless. There is things we can do.
Well, tell us about those things that we can do and the role that Indigenous knowledge can play and ought to play.
Thank you. So I've been speaking this month quite a bit about holistic wildfire management, and one component within that I think there's a lot of room for us as a province to improve upon is working closer with First Nations and with Indigenous communities across the province. We are headed in this direction, and there's companies like First Nations Emergency Services Society that is working with BC Wildfire and the province to train local community Indigenous fire crews, which is a very positive thing. But at the same time, I think that there's more that we could be doing because emergency response planning is a very important component of dealing with these cascading effects, whether it's flood, whether it's wildfire, whatever it happens to be. And at the same time, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead, finish your thought. I think I'm waiting to hear what you would like to say besides emergency planning.
Absolutely. So I think one thing that us as a province, we need to very carefully consider and have more dialogue about is how are we going to move forward with managing our forests
Mm,
collectively? And one component that is not being touched on enough is the use of prescribed burning and also cultural burning.
mm,
And a lot of the time, when cultural burning is done, it's done very closely with these Indigenous communities. We know that it's been done for centuries in BC. Unfortunately, it's been outlawed for over a century now. And that is one thing that we are slowly bringing back that we can use to manage our forests. And some of your listeners may be thinking right now, why would we want to integrate or introduce more fire into the province? And it's like, that is a very fair question because now is not the time to burn. It's like we need to do everything we can. We need our fire crews, and they're a very important component of this. We need them to protect our communities in the summer. We need to educate people about how they can stop man-made fires, human-made fires from occurring. But at the same time, there's things that we can be doing in the off season, like
mm-hmm.
in the early spring, in the fall time, because we own a lot of people, I think, only think of wildfire when they see the smoke or they see the images on the news. But prescribed burning is something that we can be doing. Cultural burning is something we can be doing in the fall and in the spring to help manage our forests because it is a part of a forest life cycle. And when we take that away, there are consequences.
How much of that is happening now? You know, we have had some of that conversation about cultural burning ahead of the wildfire season. Are we seeing much of that?
I think that in BC and across Canada as well, there are almost tests that are being done in pockets
Mm,
here and there to see how is this going to work. There's a lot of concerns about prescribing cultural burning, and they're justified, they're fair, but we are trying things here and there. But it is something that we need to have more dialogue about.
mm.
And I think that one major component of this is educating people about how fire is actually a natural component of a forest life cycle. If you can take away that anxiety, then I think it opens more room for dialogue. But at the same time, it's tragic when people are displaced by wildfire in the seasons we're having right now. So it's a very delicate thing. We need to be careful about how we're doing it. And at the same time, I think that we can work closer with Indigenous communities because these are people who know the land, who know the weather, who know the meteorology very closely, and drawing upon their wisdom when we're working in a community and trying to plan a burn, I think is something that is being done, but I'd like to highlight that it could be done more.
Okay. Now, you've worked directly with technology to actually map wildfires. How
That's
does that
right.
work and how do you apply that?
So my background is directly on the fire line, working with drone technology and infrared cameras. So basically, the way this works is the wildfire crews, they go in, they put out the fires, and sometimes it may look like the fire is out, but they can actually smolder under the ground. And you can imagine if you can't see these, well, then you kind of have to feel around for them.
Mm.
And infrared technology is an application of this where we can put it on a drone. We can fly over the area that has had the crews go in, and we can actually see fires that are invisible to the naked eye and map these out. Because you can imagine, like, let's say we have a square kilometer that we're looking for something invisible in. It's very difficult. But if you have a map showing you where these out, instead of looking in, I don't know, like a 5 or 10 meter area, imagine if your search area was down to a meter or two. It significantly makes things easier for the fire crews, but it also helps ensure the safety of the people who maybe they have had an evacuation order. The crews have gone in, they've been lifted, and this is one technology and application of it that can help ensure that the fires are actually put out.
Now, Justin, you're an instructor at BCIT. What do you say to perhaps prospective students about the forestry program and the role that the next generation can play in actually protecting our forests.
Thank you. Forestry is changing dramatically and rapidly here in BC. And if I could say one thing to young people, especially who are maybe considering the program, is don't feel like it's completely hopeless. There are things that we can be doing to help adapt to climate change. You can be a part of it. You can become stronger. And forestry, it's not inherently bad. Through our program, you can become a wildfire fighter. You can become a biologist. There are laddering programs if you want to become a biologist, work in ecological restoration, if you want to work in a municipality managing the urban forests. And at the same time, forestry is changing. There's a lot of movement from larger tenure holders to First Nations and community owned woodlots and harvesting operations. And I see a lot of hope from that avenue.
Justin, it's very good to speak with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Justin Perry is a member of the Métis Nation, British Columbia, and an instructor of forest and natural areas management at the BC Institute of Technology. It's 12:17, 1:17 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, live streaming on YouTube, cbc.ca/BC. You can use the CBC Gem app. Nice to have you with us. You can catch us at CBC Vancouver on YouTube, by the way, if you'd like to search for us there. Now, Indigenous Peoples Day is a time to learn from traditional knowledge and also a time to take a closer look at what those communities are lacking and how to help. We're going to speak with a curator for the Indigenous Peoples Solidarity Fund. Now, that's an avenue for Indigenous-led organizations to distribute financial support in communities as they see fit. And we're also taking your calls. How and what are you celebrating this National Indigenous Peoples Day? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is Wanda Brakupe. She's the curator for the Indigenous Peoples Solidarity Fund and comes from the Mohawk and Tuscarora Algonquin peoples. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us about the Indigenous Peoples Solidarity Fund. What does it aim to accomplish?
Oh, thanks for the invitation, and to all your listeners and viewers, happy National Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm really excited to talk about the Indigenous Peoples Solidarity Fund. It was actually created to share and highlight the Indigenous-led charities that exist in Canada that are doing amazing and incredible work on a daily basis, and doing it in such a way that it is safe, culturally appropriate, and engaging, and reaching people in the best way possible. So it was actually created in partnership with myself and Canada Helps, just to highlight highlight and bring to the forefront that there is a difference between Indigenous charities, Indigenous-led and Indigenous-led charities. So Indigenous-led charities are those that have boards and staff, and beneficiaries and who they serve are all Indigenous. We have Indigenous allies, charities that might not be Indigenous-led, but do have Indigenous beneficiaries. And that's where it seemed most of the resources were going. So it was a chance to highlight these incredible work that people are doing from coast to coast to coast.
And tell us about that. What is that work?
Well, there's right now, there is under Unite for Change, the Indigenous Peoples Solidarity Fund. I invite everybody to go to it. It is everything from culturally, like traditional culturally, to music, to increasing and giving space for Indigenous youth leadership. It includes, normal social services as well, homelessness, food security, food sovereignty, and food justice. It includes really a vast array of support. Again, it because it is national, there's over 60 Indigenous-led charities on it right now. We keep inviting more people in. to raise that awareness. There's a link that goes to all of those. You can read up on it. So it does. We do the work for you, so you can see it in a different way.
There you are. You curate. As your
Absolutely.
title is. Wanda Brakupe is with me, the curator of the Indigenous Peoples Solidarity Fund. And on this National Indigenous Peoples Day, we are asking you, what and how are you celebrating? Taking your calls on the open line, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, star or pound 690. And Jaden is calling us in New Denver. Hi, Jaden. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to share a little bit about myself. I am a Turtle Island artist. I am from the Nahiawak territory, which is Cree. I'm a status Turtle Island person from Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation, currently residing in the Sinaiks territory. And my main focus has been working on a project, the Sustainable Building and Land Development Education Center in the region. And I kind of put my artwork on hold in order to bring this project to fruition. It's called the Kikiwak Project. And we're wanting to teach children about sustainable building and land development, but also teach the children about First Nations art, culture, history, language, and then also really focus about what has transpired here in the territory in regards to the Sinaiks Nation. It's one of the nations in what they call Canada that is listed as extinct. And I believe it was 1956 when they were listed as extinct in order to do the Columbia Basin Treaty between Canada and the United States, which allowed them to dam up the Columbia Basin river system, which caused massive amounts of damage to the territory. In the 1990s, there was a gentleman who came up from Idaho, I believe it was, who shared that he was a Sinaiks man. He contacted conservation and said that I'm in the territory illegally hunting. He was arrested, lost his guns, his trucks, and then he got his day in court. And he fought all the way to the British Columbia Supreme Court, and he ended up winning, and the British Columbia government regained hunting and fishing rights for the Sinaiks people in the territory. But the sad thing of it is that Canada has refused to lift the extinction label.
Tell me more about those efforts to try and get that label lifted.
Well, actually, the matriarch from the Sinaiks peoples just pulled up at the store where I'm at. Her name is Marilyn James, and she's been very instrumental in the fight to bringing attention to what has happened to the peoples in this territory. She went to museums, to different museums around the world, and she repatriated the bones of her ancestors, and she brought them to a location called Valakin Hole. And right now, it's such a sad situation. They are trying to remove Marilyn James from the territory, which the British Columbia government gave her the authority. I believe they made it like a heritage site, a British Columbia heritage site, and they had her listed as the caretaker of the site. And now the Canadian government is causing massive infighting between the Ktunaxa, the Okanagan, the Shuswap, and the Sinaiks people. They're allowing the Ktunaxa to come into the territory and start clear-cut logging in certain areas. They're talking about lithium mining in the territory. So Marilyn James is part of the autonomous Sinaiks, and she has been really working tirelessly her entire existence. But she's been working tirelessly with many people to try to stop the logging of the old-growth forest in the territory, mining, any type of resource development, because that's what we're trying to share with people, is that we need to put on the brakes when it comes to resource extraction, because we're dealing with climate change like we've never seen before. And so we're just really trying to use education as a tool to educate people on how we can live more sustainably. We're working on a sustainable building and education center, and it is called the Kikiwak Project. Could I give the website?
Sure, yes.
It's KIKIWAK, F as in Frank, P as in Peter, S as in Sarah.org. And you can visit there for more information. You can also find the Kikiwak Project on Facebook, and then my artist website page is medicinebeararts.com.
Medicinebeararts.com, yes.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful for you guys having me call in today, to be able to share a little bit about what is transpiring in this territory. And we really are grateful for the support from our settler allies, as well as the other Turtle Island people who are supporting. And for all, I'll put a shout out today to my mom. Her name is Half Moon Woman. She's a famous birch bark biting artist. She's an amazing artist. And if it wasn't for my mom, of course, I wouldn't be here today. And for all of the people who are standing up on behalf of our future generations and Mother Earth, and for all the people out there today, happy Turtle Island Peoples Day. And thank you for having me on your show.
Jaden, thank you very much for the call. And again, that was the Kikiwak Project, KIKIWAKFPS.org. Thanks so much for the call. My guest right now as well is Wanda Brakupe, the curator of the Indigenous People Solidarity Fund. Wanda, you heard there someone who was talking about the work that they're doing in what's now known as the West Kootenay region, talking for the Sinixt peoples there. Wanda, when it comes to people, donors who would like to give to the fund, how can they be intentional about that?
Well, the intentionality is, it's a space to engage. I think about reconciliation like a 7th and 8th grade dance. There seems to be that there is some interest to gather and meet each other in the middle, but there's a hesitancy on how do you do it, quote unquote, right. And I use that simple analogy because it goes back to a feeling. And the feeling is that people talk about willingness to be uncomfortable. I talk about it as a willingness to be clumsy. We're all clumsy. We all stumble. We all fall over our words, fall over our feet. And if there is an intention to engage and you have not done it before, or you have and you thought, maybe I didn't do it in a correct way. This is just one way. What Jaden was talking about, go to his website and have a peek at the 2 websites that he gave, but also to look into what an Indigenous-led charity, what Jaden was sharing was Indigenous-led, people in community on the ground doing volunteering, doing some incredible work on a daily basis. So under Unite for Change, go to Unite for Change, Indigenous People Solidarity Fund, you can give, be a quote unquote a donor. I like the use of the words ally. It's a way to participate. You can have a peruse of charities that are doing some really great things. If you dig, there's a little thing that says link here. You can give to the larger fund, which all of it will then go directly to the Indigenous-led of the 60 plus that we have on the site right now. And again, we invite more people in if you're Indigenous-led and have a charitable number, as well as look at yourselves. What's important to you? If you are a donor, if you're a first-time donor, so maybe you donate to leadership, maybe you donate into arts, or donate into social justice. You can find Indigenous-led charities that are doing significant work, be it in what we now call BC, or be it in the rest of Canada from coast to coast to coast. There are many things that you can look and see. So I invite you to come in and take that moment, particularly today. But while you take that moment today and maybe you have conversations at your dinner table tonight, you can also challenge yourself or invite yourself. I like the word invitation, to revisit it. Revisit it once a week. Put links in your phone, follow them on Twitter or Instagram, so that they do become a part of your daily lives, your daily feed, and obviously programs like this. Just engagement of today and having good conversations within your own home.
I appreciate our conversation right now. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That's Wanda Brakupe, the curator for the Indigenous Peoples Solidarity Fund. It's 12:30, 1:30 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, live streaming on YouTube, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Gem app. We will continue to talk about National Indigenous Peoples Day in our next half hour, asking you what and how you are celebrating today. My colleague, CBC journalist Wamish Hamilton, will join us. Coming up after this CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. 2 people are dead and 2 managed to survive after a plane crashed into the water off a remote area of Vancouver Island. The small Quest Kodiak went down yesterday in Tassis Inlet. It was en route from Haida Gwaii to Tofino. Police say they were able to speak to the 2 survivors but didn't release any information about their injuries. The search continues for 2 men from the Lower Mainland reported missing on Stump Lake south of Kamloops. Police say their boat has not been found, but volunteers with Kamloops Search and Rescue did recover some debris belonging to the men near the north end of the lake. The RCMP Underwater Recovery Team has also been called in. And the Fraser Health Authority is reaching out to the South Asian community in the ongoing fight against toxic drugs. It has launched a campaign in Punjabi, Hindi, and Urdu to try to get more input as it seeks to improve care. And now the forecast on the north coast, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with a high of 13. Highs reaching 23 with local smoke and some sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, a high of 21 with a mix of sun and cloud and some smoke as well. Cloudy in the Kootenays with highs to 17. In the southern interior, cloudy with a high of 20 degrees. And a chance of showers in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. Mainly sunny this afternoon in Greater Victoria with highs reaching 19. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. It's 12:32, 1:32 in the Mountain Time Zone as we mark National Indigenous Peoples Day. We're going to take you now to a live event that commemorates today. More than 700 students and staff from 30 schools are gathered at the Vancouver School Board Education Centre to celebrate and honor the rich cultures of Indigenous peoples. CBC reporter Yasmin Gandam joins me now live. Hello there, Yasmin.
Good afternoon, Michelle. As you said, over 700 students here today, a great display of appreciation for the Indigenous culture. You can see some of the students behind me here. They have been listening to traditional Indigenous music all morning, so it's very exciting.
Yes, as I can see just for our listeners as well, I think it looks like they're having their lunch break as well on the grass there behind you. It sounds like it's been an exciting,
yes, no, definitely
exciting day. How is this organized, Yasmin?
So this is the 4th year that the event has been organized by the Vancouver School Board. And, you know, it's just grown in size. It's now spreading throughout all of Canada. And so it's really important to just really raise awareness about the importance of Indigenous education across schools here in the Lower Mainland.
And tell me about what you're hearing. Is there someone there that you can speak to for us?
Yeah, you know, we're hearing so much excitement from staff, from students. You know, they're learning a lot of key pieces of Indigenous culture. And actually, here to tell you more about it, I have the Indigenous instructor, program lead, actually, across the Vancouver School Board, Chaz Desjardins. Tell me a little bit about why today is so significant.
Well, I think it's a day to gather as Indigenous peoples. When we gather, it shows that we're connected. And I think for VSB students, educators, and staff, it is really about conveying Indigenous brilliance and Indigenous joy. And what you see on the face of the students is joy when they're listening to the music. And learning about the local nations here, the Hamathwim, the Skohomish Alkameo, the Slaybatak people, and as well as other Indigenous nations from across Canada and around the world.
And this event has been going on for a few years now, but what makes this year in particular unique and special for the Indigenous community?
I think every year is special, and this is the final drums around the world. We started in 2020 with drums across BC, and this was coming from the vision of our district vice principal, Davida Marsden. And so as a department, we've all worked together collectively to provide this beautiful educational learning opportunity for VSB students, but also for school districts across British Columbia and Canada, because there is a Drums Across the World video that has been shared. So teachings from Indigenous knowledge keepers, elders, storytellers, singers, dancers, sharing the teachings from their nations, and that gets.
Definitely you can see those teachings really being spread across here, and it's definitely very exciting. Thank you so much. This is Chaz Desjardins speaking to us about the importance of the Indigenous instruction across the schools in Vancouver. Back to you, Michelle.
Yasmin, thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of the day, okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's definitely a nice day to be out here enjoying.
That's CBC reporter Yasmin Gandam with Chaz Desjardins, Acting Director of Instruction with the Indigenous Education Department at the VSB. Well, today is National Indigenous Peoples Day, and we recognize and celebrate the history, heritage, and resilience and diversity of First Nations. And we're asking you, how and what are you celebrating today, National Indigenous Peoples Day? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm joined right now by Mike Rataskett, the interpreter at Barkerville Historic Town and Park and recent recipient of an honorary Doctor of Letters degree from the University of the Fraser Valley. He's from the Shuswap Nation. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon and happy Indigenous Peoples Day.
And to you, how are you celebrating today?
Well, this morning we started out with a whole group of elementary students from the Wells Elementary School here, adjacent to Barkerville, and they came in and we shared a drum song, and I was able to share some really fun information with them. And let me tell you something, some of the questions that came from those very young students were very profound, and it was such a fun and exciting time here in Barkerville.
What kinds of questions?
Well, I shared a couple of artifacts, an arrowhead, and I shared some scrapers and just different old style tools, more modern tools that they're made to look like old tools. And it was just the greatest thing for them to see. They were amazed and astonished.
Mike, you're a knowledge keeper. How challenging is it to pass down that knowledge, the language, culture, and ceremonies, and tools as well to young people?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because for me, as I am sharing the interpretation here in Barkerville, I kind of gauge the interest in the guests too, because we have a wide range of guests coming into Barkerville from all over the world, for sure. Can they speak English? Do they understand English? Am I talking too fast? And those kind of things. So all of those kind of things are taking place as we're doing the interpretation. Some of the guests that we have are very interested in learning more about our culture, and it has come time and age to begin to recognize those kind of things and how interesting we are as people.
Right, and because you do educate tourists as well, why do you think it is important for newcomers to learn about Indigenous peoples' histories?
Such a broad question, but I think the way that I'll answer it, I'm going to use the term they for lack of a better term. Whoever they are, they never really looked at us as Kalmukh, and Kalmukh is an Indian word for people. So they never really looked at us. We were the Indians, and then we were the pagans, and then the hostiles and heathens and savages, and now today we're more environmentalists and those kind of things. So when we're sharing stories with the guests, we're able to touch on some of the root problems of what had happened by ignoring us. And now we're seeing that today in terms of the traditional ecological knowledge that we do have, and we can share that to help in the work towards climate action and those type of things.
We sure are hearing about that this hour. Now, you were chief of the Bonaparte Indian Band for 10 years. How did that impact your own involvement in your community?
When I was the chief of our tribe, I gave them everything I had. And the only thing I received in return was the knowledge that I've helped a lot of people along my way. And when I was no longer chief, I happened to discover Indigenous tourism. And so, to answer the question, I left. I left the Bonaparte band with good heart, mind, and soul, in a lot better of a financial position than they have ever seen in the history of Bonaparte, certainly. And then from there, moved on to Indigenous tourism and just fell in love with it, and I haven't stopped yet.
Well, we're glad to have you on today to tell us all about that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Mike Rataskett is the interpreter at Barkerville Historic Town and Park, a recent recipient of an honorary Doctor of Letters degree from the University of the Fraser Valley. It's 12:31, 1:41 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today here on CBC, on radio and live streaming as well. Very nice to have you on this National Indigenous Peoples Day. And we are asking you as well, how and what are you celebrating today? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, CBC journalist Wamish Hamilton is with the CBC BC Urban Nations, and he joins me now. Hello there, Wamish.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you for joining us. Happy National Indigenous Peoples Day to you. Thanks for being here.
Cheers, thank you.
And so, what does this day mean to you?
It means different things to me each year at this time. So, for instance, this year, it means honoring it means honoring my parents and my wife's parents' time in residential school. Both sets of our parents spent a lot of years in residential school. And coming out of that relatively resilient. Also, it's a chance to reflect on the larger questions about Indigenous people, about our communities, and the issues that we're involved with. And lastly, it's a chance for us to gather as a family. My 5 children live here in Vancouver, and it's a chance for us to gather as a family, to honor both cultures they come from, to enjoy a meal together, and tonight go and see the movie Bones and Crows.
I'd love to ask you about that film, Bones and Crows, and what it means and the story that it tells.
We're going to see it. I haven't seen it yet.
Yes.
Yeah. It documents and chronicles a character's time spanning her childhood through residential school, her involvement with the Canadian Forces during the war, and then afterward confronting, dealing with her time in residential school.
And it's certainly a very painful time to revisit and to think about, and you're thinking about the history that your families have been to as well. How does that fit into the resilience part that you were talking about?
I always liken it to that period of time when I think about my parents. I think when anybody in my generation thinks about their parents, a lot of them came out iron tough. I call that time, that's when they were on an anvil. That's when generations of kids were on this anvil and just hammered and shaped and hardened. And they came out of that experience, no doubt traumatized, a trauma that they're still dealing with today. And that dealing with that trauma today is part of being resilient. I think it's the final stage in that resilience.
And so for today, as you think about that and that resilience as well, and reconciliation, what does reconciliation mean to you then?
It's again, it means different things to different people, and in some instances, it doesn't mean anything to some people as well. And I have to acknowledge that perspective. That being said, to myself, I always look at it like an opportunity to work with the non-Indigenous people who live in our midst. So, for instance, the non-Indigenous journalists, professionals whom I work with. I like working with non-Indigenous journalists, non-Indigenous people, because number one, there just aren't enough Indigenous storytellers to go around. yet. But at the same time, I've always said, since I got into this business, what are non-Indigenous journalists learning if they're not doing this kind of work, doing these kind of stories? And I'm happy to work with them doing this kind of stories, because I like to think I'm leaving a little something, teaching them a little something, and they teach me something too.
And you certainly do that. You teach your colleagues like myself here at work, and you teach students as well. Yeah.
That I do at UBC as a co-instructor for the Reporting Indigenous Communities program. It's a chance to what's the word I'm looking for? Mentor? To influence budding journalists at the very beginnings of their career about reporting in Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous people.
So today, Wamish, what are you celebrating? How are you celebrating?
What am I celebrating? I'm celebrating what I just mentioned. It's a chance, I think, for all of us to take the, when I say all of us, I mean Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike. I know it is National Indigenous Peoples Day, but I think it's a chance for all of us to reflect on what we choose to put into this day during this time of year, now and in future years, so that as we go on into the future, we collectively can make this day worth celebrating.
It's really good to speak with you, as always. So nice to have you here on the show, Wamish. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
That's Wamish Hamilton, my colleague here at CBC, and he works with the BC Urban Nations. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming as well on cbc.ca/BC, as well as on CBC Gem app and on CBC Vancouver's YouTube page. Now back to a story we started with today, how Indigenous customs can help with wildfire fighting efforts. Tyrone McNeil is the tribal chief and president of the Stalo Tribal Council and chair of the Emergency Planning Secretariat. He spoke to Stephen Quinn on the early edition this morning.
I think Indigenous knowledge is kind of poor terminology. It's our science. It's our how long we've been watching and caretaking for the land is really intimate knowledge, right? And most folks just take knowledge. Oh, that's just information. Right. You could take it or leave it. So terminology is kind of important there as well.
Yeah, I mean, because we're not talking about a set of facts or figures here. We're talking about the way things work in very specific areas that you know well.
Exactly, because we know that our land like the back of our hand. We know which way the wind goes, which time of the year. But we do accept that climate, that environment is changing. But we know what the baseline is, and we're starting to bridge with new knowledge where climate change is going. Many of us grew up in a rainforest here in southwest BC and coastal BC, and they're not really rainforests anymore, Stephen. So we need to track that more efficiently as well.
That's Tyrone McNeil, tribal chief and president of the Stalo Tribal Council and chair of the Emergency Planning Secretariat. 12:49, 1:49 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, live streaming on CBC Vancouver's YouTube page, on the CBC Gem app, and you can catch us as well on our website, cbc.ca/BC. I'm Michelle Eliot. Very nice to spend the lunch hour with you today. And if you're watching us on demand after the show, very nice to have you with us. Thanks so much for watching our program. We're going to go to a story outside BC now. The clock is ticking as crews continue the desperate search for 5 people lost deep underwater. Their submersible is somewhere 600 kilometers off the coast of Newfoundland. On board are a British adventurer, a French explorer, and a prominent investor and his teenage son. And the CEO of the tour company they've all entrusted their lives to, Kayla Hounsell, reports now.
These are the last known images of Titan, taken as it was launching Sunday morning, now lost in the North Atlantic with 5 people on board.
In the dark, they're shivering cold, and they are having to control their breathing to breathe as little as possible, to rest.
But no one knows where they are. They were headed for the Titanic wreck, 685 kilometers south of St. John's. An extensive and complex search has been underway since the Titan lost all communication with the ship that launched it.
To date, those search efforts have not yielded any results.
More aircraft, U.S. and Canadian, are arriving in St. John's to help. But they're searching for a capsule, just 7 meters long and under 3 meters high, around the size of a minivan and possibly 4,000 meters below the surface.
If you were to find the submersible at this moment, would that give you enough time to save these 5 people on board?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. What I will tell you is we will do everything in our power to effect a rescue.
The Titan set out with an estimated 96 hours of air. As of mid-afternoon, there were around 40 hours left. CBS correspondent David Pogue made the same voyage last year, among those bolted inside the Titan from the outside.
You do sign quite a waiver. It is paragraph after paragraph, literally outlining all the ways that you could die.
Hi, my name is Stockton Rush. I'm the CEO and founder of OceanGate.
The sub's owner is among those lost at sea. In a breach of contract lawsuit, the company's former director of marine operations claimed he was fired after raising concerns about the sub's safety. Rush previously said passengers knew the risks. Also on board this time, British billionaire Hamish Harding, French explorer Paul-Henri Nargeolet, and Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his son.
At this point, families need to prepare themselves for bad news.
Thanks so much to Kayla Hounsell for that story. You continue to watch that story off the coast of Newfoundland, of course. 12:52, 1:52 in the Mountain Time Zone. And as you heard in our 12:30 news update with Rob Zimmerman, some more breaking news from today in BC. 2 people are dead and 2 have managed to survive after a plane crashed into the water off a remote area of Vancouver Island. Now, the small Quest Kodiak went down yesterday in Tassis Inlet. For the latest on this, we're joined now by CBC News reporter Jessica Chung. Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
What's
How
the
you doing?
latest? I'm okay. What's the latest on this this story?
Yeah, well, police are right now working with the Transportation Safety Board and the Coroner Service to find out what exactly happened to cause this crash. It happened yesterday at around 2 p.m. in the Tassis Inlet near Mizona Point. Now, that's around 300 kilometers northwest of Victoria. 2 people unfortunately died from the crash. 2 others were airlifted out and transported to hospital. There is no update as of yet as to what their condition is. Now, the plane, which has been identified as a single propeller Quest Kodiak 100 plane with floats, did crash in this inlet. Mounties and the TSB said the plane was flying from Masset on Haida Gwaii, around 600 kilometers northwest of the crash site, to Tofino. And the TSB said the plane crashed on the ground 111 kilometers from Tofino and caught fire.
What else are you hearing from the RCMP?
Well, they are saying that actually this plane crash did cause a bit of a wildfire in that area. BC Wildfire Service has been notified, and they are looking into mitigating that wildfire. But, you know, the police are saying that all of these factors did make for a pretty difficult rescue mission. Crews, first of all, had difficulty accessing that remote area, and then having a wildfire on top of it, really did make it much more difficult. I did ask the RCMP in terms of how the investigation is going in terms of the cause. They're, again, working with the Transportation Safety Board and the Coroner Service. They're not speculating in terms of what factors went into why the plane went down, but they did say that they do know, the next of kin are notified, especially on the people who are survived the crash and are recovering right now, but they aren't releasing the identities of those people.
Okay, and we'll continue to follow this story. Jessica, thank you very much for joining us.
You got it.
That's CBC News reporter Jessica Chung. And we will, of course, have more details through the afternoon here on CBC Radio 1. You can also check our website, that's cbc.ca/BC, and you will see more on that this evening on the CBC News at 6. It's 12:55 now, 1:55 in the Mountain Time Zone. And as we close our show for today, time for some music now. He's Ontario singer-songwriter Dallas Green, who's also known as City in Color, with his song Underground.
Wasted days
city in color with Underground. That is it for our show today. Thanks so much to everyone who called in, and thank you for watching and listening to BC Today. Have a great afternoon.